The glass-walled dining room of the Winter Lodge glowed under the soft chandeliers, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing the snow-dusted peaks outside. Clara Bennett, 25 and wiry, moved with practiced ease between tables, her black uniform crisp but her shoes slightly scuffed from long shifts. She balanced a tray of wine glasses, her eyes scanning the room for signals. A raised hand, an empty plate. The air smelled of roasted lamb and cedar, and the low hum of wealthy chatter filled the space. Clara's focus was sharp, but her mind wandered briefly to her father's old linguistics books, stacked untouched in her small apartment. She pushed the thought away as she approached the VIP table, where 4 figures sat in a bubble of their own importance. Victor Armand, the billionaire CEO of a luxury fashion empire, leaned back in his chair, his tailored suit catching the light. His half-French charm was undeniable, sharp jawline, dark hair swept back, but his eyes were cold, dismissive. He barely glanced at Clara as she set a glass of Bordeaux beside him. His girlfriend, Lena Duarte, was busy angling her phone to capture the perfect shot of her plate, her glossy lips pursed in concentration. Henrik Lowe, Victor's hedge fund partner, sat stiffly, his tie too tight, his gaze darting to his phone every few seconds. Sophia Klein, the European investor, was the quiet one, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the room, her expression unreadable. Clara poured the wine with steady hands, her movements deliberate. She caught Victor muttering something under his breath in French to Lena, his voice low and smug. Lena's eyes flicked up, amused, but Clara kept her face neutral. She stepped back, tray tucked under her arm, and moved to the next table. The weight of their indifference pressed on her, but she was used to it. The lodge was a playground for the elite, and she was just part of the scenery, until Victor's voice carried again, louder this time, as she returned with a tray of appetizers. She set down a plate of seared scallops, the porcelain clinking softly. Victor leaned toward Lena, his words dripping with mockery. "Look at her shoes," he said in French, his accent polished but not perfect. "Clumsy, like she's stomping through a barn. And that face, provincial no." Lena stifled a giggle, her fingers tapping her phone to zoom in on Clara's hands as she poured more wine. Clara's grip tightened on the tray, but she kept her eyes down, placing the next plate with care. Victor's voice was a blade, cutting through the hum of the room, and she felt the sting of it. Still, she moved to Henrik's side, offering him a plate. He nodded curtly, avoiding her gaze. The table's dynamic was clear. Victor led, Lena followed, Henrik tolerated, and Sophia observed. Clara stepped back again, her heart thudding. She understood every word Victor had said. Her father, a linguistics professor, had drilled French into her since she was a child. But she swallowed the urge to react, her face a mask of calm. She turned to clear a nearby table, catching a glimpse of Lena's phone screen as she filmed, her caption already forming. "Fine dining, finer company." Clara's jaw tightened, but she moved on, her steps silent against the polished wood floor. Victor's voice rose again as Clara approached with the main course, lamb medallions, arranged like art on the plates. He switched to Italian this time, his tone sharper, more reckless. "This one doesn't belong in a place like this," he said, his eyes flicking to Clara's hands as she set a plate in front of him. "The lodge should polish its floors and its staff." Henrik let out a nervous chuckle, his fork pausing midair. Lena laughed openly, her phone now resting on the table, capturing the moment. Sophia's brow furrowed, her lips pressing into a thin line, but she said nothing. Clara's pulse quickened, her fingers brushing the edge of the tray. The insult landed like a slap, but she kept her movements smooth, placing the last plate in front of Sophia. Clara stepped back, her breath shallow. The room felt smaller, the air heavier with the weight of Victor's words. She could feel the eyes of other guests now, their whispers starting to ripple. A woman in a fur stole at the next table glanced over, her lips parted in curiosity. Clara's mind raced. She could respond, could let the words she'd held back spill out. Her father's voice echoed in her head, his lessons on language as a weapon, a shield. But she stayed silent, her hands steady as she adjusted the tray. Victor leaned back, smirking, his confidence unshaken. "Another round of wine?" he said in English, waving a hand without looking at her. Lena giggled again, her fingers dancing over her phone. Clara nodded, her voice calm. Right away, sir. She turned toward the bar, her steps measured, but her mind was alight. She understood every jab, every language he'd used to mock her. French, Italian, it didn't matter. She'd spent years studying under her father, absorbing languages like a sponge. And now Victor's arrogance was a spark, igniting something she'd kept buried. As she reached the bar, she caught her reflection in the glass. A young woman in a plain uniform, underestimated, invisible. But not for long. She poured the wine, her hands steady, and started back toward the table, her decision forming with every step. She set the first glass down in front of Henrik, who muttered a quick thanks. Lena was still filming, her phone angled to catch the gleam of the chandelier light on the wine. Victor's eyes were on his plate, his smirk lingering as he spoke again in French, this time to Henrik. She's slow too. Maybe she's counting her tips in her head. Henrik's laugh was strained, his eyes darting to Clara. Sophia's gaze was steady, locked on Victor, her silence louder than the room's chatter. Clara placed the next glass in front of Lena, who barely acknowledged her. The air was thick now, the tension coiling tighter with every word Victor spoke. Clara reached Victor's side, setting the glass down with a soft clink. His eyes flicked up briefly, then away, dismissing her again. She straightened, her tray tucked under her arm, and for the first time, she let herself meet his gaze. The room seemed to pause, the murmurs fading. Victor raised an eyebrow, his smirk faltering just slightly. Clara's voice was steady, her words deliberate. Is there anything else you need, sir? She asked in English, but her tone carried a weight that made Henrik shift in his seat. Victor waved a hand, still in French. Just keep the wine coming, girl. Lena snorted, her phone still rolling. Clara didn't move. Her eyes held Victor's, and for a moment, the room felt like it was holding its breath. She opened her mouth, her voice low but clear, and began to speak. Clara's voice cut through the air, not in English but in flawless French, her words crisp and deliberate. If you're going to critique my service, sir, at least use proper grammar. Your subjunctive was off in that last comment. She paused, letting the correction hang. Victor's smirk froze, his eyes narrowing as if he hadn't heard her right. Lena's phone dipped slightly, her fingers hesitating over the screen. Henrik's fork hovered midair, and Sophia's lips twitched, a spark of amusement breaking her stoic mask. The chatter from nearby tables hushed, heads turning as Clara stood tall, her tray still tucked under her arm. Victor blinked, his face tightening, but he recovered quickly, leaning back with a forced chuckle. Cute, he said in English, his tone dripping with condescension. You picked up a few phrases, did you? He switched back to French, his voice sharper now, testing her. Let's see how far that little parlor trick goes. He tossed out another insult, this time about her clumsy hands and how they ruined the aesthetic of the table. The words were meant to sting, to put her back in her place. Lena smirked, her phone angling to catch Clara's reaction, sensing drama for her followers. Clara didn't flinch. She responded in French again, her accent cleaner than his, her grammar impeccable. My hands are steady enough to serve you, sir, but I'm afraid your pronunciation could use some polish. She added a faint smile, her eyes locked on his. A gasp rippled through the room, soft but unmistakable. A man in a velvet blazer at a nearby table leaned forward, whispering to his companion. Lena's phone wavered, her smile fading as she realized this wasn't the content she'd expected. Henrik coughed, his napkin crumpling in his hand, while Sophia leaned forward, her sharp gaze flicking between Clara and Victor. Victor's jaw tightened, his fingers drumming on the table. He switched to Italian, his voice low and venomous. You think you're clever, don't you? A waitress playing scholar. The words were meant to dismiss her, to shrink her back to invisibility. But Clara's response came in Italian, smooth and unhurried, dismantling his insult with precision. Cleverness isn't in the title, sir. It's in the mind. And mine was trained by someone who'd run circles around you in any language. She paused, her voice softening but cutting deeper. My father, a linguistics professor. He debated your father once, you know. And won. The room seemed to contract, the air charged with the weight of her words. Henrik's fork clattered against his plate, his face paling. Sophia's eyes gleamed with something like respect, her fingers tapping thoughtfully against her wine glass. Lena lowered her phone completely now, her lips parted, unsure whether to keep filming or stop. Victor's face reddened, his composure cracking like thin ice. He opened his mouth to retort, but Clara wasn't done. She switched to Spanish, her voice steady but laced with quiet fire. You mocked my shoes, my face, my place here. But you didn't know I understood every word. That's your mistake, not mine. Gasps spread like wildfire across the dining room. A woman in a pearl necklace clutched her husband's arm, her eyes wide. A waiter near the bar froze, a bottle of wine halfway to a glass. Victor tried to laugh, but it came out strained, a hollow sound that didn't reach his eyes. You think this matters? He said in English, his voice louder now, trying to reclaim control. You're still just the help. But the words lacked bite, and the room knew it. Henrik shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to Sophia, who was now openly watching Clara with a faint, approving nod. Clara set her tray down on a nearby stand, her movements deliberate. She stepped closer to the table, her voice dropping to a calm, piercing tone in French. Power isn't in what you steal from others. It's in what you understand. She let the words linger, her eyes never leaving Victor's. His fingers gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Lena's phone was now face down on the table, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Henrik cleared his throat, muttering something about the lamb being cold, but no one paid attention. Sophia's voice broke the silence, low and measured in English. She's right, Victor. You've underestimated her. Badly. The room was alive with whispers now, the guests no longer pretending to ignore the scene. A man in a cashmere sweater pulled out his phone, not to film but to text, his fingers flying. Clara stood her ground, her heart pounding but her face calm. She'd spent years being invisible, swallowing the slights of people like Victor. But tonight, something had shifted. Her father's lessons, his voice in her head, had given her the tools to fight back, not with anger, but with precision. She picked up her tray again, her movements graceful, and turned to leave the table. Victor's voice stopped her, sharp and unsteady. You think you've won something here? He said, still in English, his eyes burning with humiliated fury. Clara turned back, her expression serene but unyielding. She answered in French, her voice carrying just enough to reach the nearest tables. I'm not here to win, sir. I'm here to do my job. But I won't let you make me feel small. She paused, then added in English, her tone almost gentle, Would you like more wine? The question was a dagger, polite but devastating. Lena's mouth opened, then closed, her influencer facade crumbling. Henrik stared at his plate, his face a mask of discomfort. Sophia's lips curved into a small, genuine smile, her eyes locked on Clara with quiet admiration. Victor's silence was deafening. He leaned back, his hands falling to his lap, his earlier arrogance replaced by a flicker of something else. Shock, maybe, or the dawning realization that he'd been outmatched. Clara waited a beat, then turned toward the bar, her steps steady. The room watched her go, the whispers growing louder, a mix of awe and disbelief. She could feel Victor's stare on her back, but it didn't weigh her down. For the first time that night, she felt light, as if she'd shed something heavy. The tray in her hands was no longer a burden. It was a shield, and she wielded it with quiet power. Clara's steps echoed softly as she crossed the polished floor of the Winter Lodge, the tray still steady in her hands. The dining room was a sea of murmurs now, the guests' eyes following her, their whispers a mix of shock and admiration. Victor's silence hung heavy behind her, his earlier bravado reduced to a brittle shell. Lena's phone remained face down on the table, her fingers twitching as if unsure what to do without her usual script of filters and captions. Henrik's face was a mask of discomfort, his eyes darting to the other guests, clearly calculating the damage to his reputation. Only Sophia remained composed, her sharp gaze tracking Clara with a quiet intensity, like someone recognizing a rare opportunity. Clara reached the bar, setting the tray down with a soft clink. The bartender, a wiry man named Tom, gave her a quick nod, his eyes wide with unspoken questions. He'd heard the exchange, seen the way the room shifted. Clara offered a small smile, her heart still racing but her resolve unshaken. She could feel the weight of the moment, the way her words had turned the tables, not just on Victor, but on the entire room's perception of her. She wasn't just the waitress anymore. She was Clara Bennett, daughter of a scholar, wielder of words sharper than any blade. Back at the VIP table, Victor's voice broke the tense silence, his tone forced and brittle. "This is absurd," he said in English, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "She's making a scene to get attention. Typical." He waved a hand dismissively, but the gesture lacked conviction. His face was flushed, his eyes darting to Lena for support. She hesitated, her usual instinct to back him warring with the shift in the room's energy. The guests weren't laughing with him anymore. Their whispers were about Clara, about the way she dismantled his arrogance with quiet precision. Lena, ever the opportunist, sensed the tide turning. She leaned forward, her voice sugary but calculated, speaking in English for the first time all night. "Wow, Clara, right? How many languages do you speak?" Her smile was all teeth, her phone still untouched, as if she could pivot this moment into something that might salvage her image. Clara turned back, her expression calm but unyielding. She set a fresh bottle of wine on the table, her movements deliberate. "Enough to understand everything you've said about me tonight," she said, her voice steady, each word landing like a pebble in still water. The ripples spread, guests at nearby tables leaned closer, their murmurs growing sharper. Lena's smile faltered, her eyes flicking to Victor, who was now gripping his glass so tightly his knuckles whitened. Henrik cleared his throat, trying to defuse the tension. "Let's not make this a spectacle," he muttered, his voice low but audible. "We're here for business, Victor." His tone was a plea, a desperate attempt to steer the night back to normalcy. But Sophia, who had been silent too long, finally spoke, her voice clear and cutting. "No, Henrik. This is a spectacle. And it's one Victor created." She turned her sharp eyes on Clara, a faint smile playing on her lips. "You, on the other hand, have my attention." Clara met Sophia's gaze, a spark of mutual understanding passing between them. She nodded slightly, then stepped back, her tray tucked under her arm again. The room was alive now, the air electric with anticipation. A woman in a sapphire dress at a nearby table whispered loudly to her companion, "Did you hear that? She speaks 4 languages." The man nodded, his phone already out, typing furiously. Clara felt the shift, the way the room's focus had turned from Victor's power to her quiet strength. But she didn't let it distract her. She moved to another table, refilling glasses, her movements as steady as ever. Victor, however, was unraveling. He slammed his napkin down, the sharp sound drawing every eye back to him. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, his voice louder now, tinged with desperation. "You think you can humiliate me? In my own world?" He stood, his chair scraping against the floor, his face a mask of humiliated fury. Lena shrank back, her hands folding in her lap, her influencer confidence gone. Henrik's eyes widened, his fingers twitching as if he wanted to disappear. Sophia, though, remained unfazed, her gaze steady on Victor. "Your world," she said, her voice low but piercing. "It seems to me you've just lost your footing in it." The room fell silent again, the weight of Sophia's words sinking in. Clara paused at the edge of the dining room, her tray still in hand, watching the scene unfold. Victor's chest heaved, his eyes darting from Sophia to Clara, searching for an escape. But there was none. The guests were no longer his audience, they were Clara's. A man in a tailored suit raised his glass slightly in her direction, a subtle nod of respect. A woman in pearls murmured, "She's incredible," to her table-mate. The whispers grew, a chorus of awe and judgment that drowned out Victor's fading authority. Clara took a breath, her father's voice echoing in her mind. "Words are power, Clara. Use them wisely." She stepped forward again, her voice calm but resonant, addressing the table in English. I didn't come here to humiliate anyone, she said, her eyes meeting Victor's. I came to do my job. But I won't let you make me feel less than I am. She paused, letting the words settle. My father taught me that respect isn't bought with money or status. It's earned through understanding. And I understand more than you ever will. Victor's face twisted, his mouth opening to retort, but no words came. Lena, sensing the final shift, stood abruptly, her chair wobbling. Victor, maybe we should go, she said, her voice tight, her eyes avoiding Clara's. She grabbed her phone, tucking it into her purse, her earlier bravado replaced by a desperate need to distance herself from the wreckage. Henrik was already on his feet, muttering about a meeting, his face flushed with embarrassment. Only Sophia remained seated, her eyes still on Clara, a quiet respect radiating from her. Sophia stood slowly, her movements deliberate, and addressed the room, her voice carrying effortlessly. I'd trust her intellect over your arrogance any day, Victor, she said, her words slicing through the tension. She turned to Clara, her expression softening. You've reminded us what real strength looks like. Thank you. She placed a business card on the table, sliding it toward Clara. If you ever want to use that mind of yours in a bigger arena, call me. With that, she turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking with purpose. The room erupted in murmurs, the guests no longer hiding their fascination. Victor stood frozen, his hands clenched at his sides, his empire of confidence crumbling. Lena was already halfway to the door, her phone clutched tightly, her influencer mask shattered. Henrik followed, his head down, avoiding the eyes of the other guests. Clara watched them go, her heart steady now, the fire in her chest replaced by a quiet calm. She picked up Sophia's card, tucking it into her pocket, and turned back to her work, refilling a glass at a nearby table. The guests watched her, their whispers now filled with admiration. She's extraordinary, a man in a tweed jacket said, loud enough for her to hear. A woman in a velvet gown nodded, adding, she put him in his place without raising her voice. Clara kept moving, her tray a steady extension of her will, but inside, she felt the weight of her victory. Not just over Victor, but over every moment she'd been made to feel small. Her father's lessons, his love for language, had given her this moment, a shield, a sword, a legacy. As the night wound down, the dining room emptied, the guests leaving with stories of the waitress who'd turned the tables on a billionaire. Clara cleared the last plates, her movements graceful, her face serene. Tom, the bartender, caught her eye and gave her a thumbs up, his grin wide. You're a legend, Clara, he said softly. She smiled, a real one this time, and nodded. The lodge felt lighter now, the air no longer heavy with Victor's arrogance. Clara glanced out the glass walls at the snowy peaks, their quiet strength mirroring her own. She slipped Sophia's card from her pocket, turning it over in her fingers. The future felt open, vast, like the mountains outside. She wasn't just a waitress anymore, she was Clara Bennett, a woman who'd faced a giant and won, not with wealth or power, but with the quiet, unyielding strength of her mind. As the chandeliers dimmed and the snowy peaks stood silent outside, the waitress's quiet strength left an echo in the room, a reminder that true power comes from within, not from wealth or status. Her words, sharp and steady, turned the tables on arrogance, proving that no one is invisible when they choose to stand tall. If this story moved you, hit that like button to show your support, share it with someone who needs a spark of inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe for more cinematic tales of triumph and transformation. Ring the bell so you never miss a moment, and let's keep telling stories that matter. See you in the next one.